joining. We had a record 257 people sign up for this webinar, so I'm quite honored that you turned up. We are recording the webinar. I'm skipping ahead of myself slightly by saying that, but it tends to be the first thing people wonder. My name is Ben McLeish. I do outreach and advocacy at Altmetric, as well as the Dimensions service at Digital Science. Both of those services somewhat intercombined today, so that'll be something that I do touch upon, but our focus here is on the Altmetric Explorer and some of its new features. So to give you a quick rundown of what we're going to be doing, so there is a question and answer box in the GoToWebinar software. I know that some of you can see it because you actually used it to let me know that you could see things, so thank you for that. We will distribute the slides as well as the recording afterwards, and I expect actually this one to run about 30 minutes, perhaps slightly longer with questions as well, but it is it's fairly lightweight when it comes to slides. I've got 10 slides for you. We'll do some live demos. Most of it will be explaining how it is that Altmetric has managed to include filters for both open access items as well as the funding of those items. That's what I'll mostly be focusing on. So the overview for that will be that we'll take the filtering by funders first, how we track funders at Digital Science. Let me just edit that silly mistake there. How we do track funders at Altmetric and Digital Science, where we get that data from. It's the #1 question whenever we bring up the fact that we can, we preside over a large set of information about what people are funding. I will explain how you do this filtering within the Explorer for Institutions and Explorer for Publishers database. It's not something you'd see in the free librarian version or on our details pages. And then very quickly, how that is performed in the quick search or the advanced search, and then how to export that data. And then we'll cover the open access status as well. And then also, I'll just touch very briefly on the 2 main use cases for these enhancements, why we bothered building this for you. So step 1, searching by filter, searching and filtering by funding. How do we do this? So the first step for how we begin to even know who has funded something is that work is actually not performed by the Altmetric team itself. We're very lucky at Digital Science that we have the Dimensions service, which used to be a funding database. It is now expanded into a database that will even track publications, as well as the funding and what led to that publication, as well as patents and other items as well. But they've spent a long time working directly with the world's major funders and indexing funding data from around the world. That takes many forms. So it could be that we are in a direct partnership to actually index that funder's data. We will get in touch with them. We will draw their data from their internal records. We will then put it through a data mining algorithm that will pull out things like who the primary investigators were, the institutions involved with it, what the resulting publications were, the amounts and things like that. And that gives us, for the Altmetric side, the ability to tell you what item was funded by whom. We will also, in many cases where we're not yet working directly with funders, we are out there scraping their funding websites to sort of index their funding that they have put online. And sometimes we do it through APIs with funders as well. So that's how we sort of get the data in. It is a process of significant work. It's not something you can simply copy off the internet. It does very often require us to be able to get the individual grant records. And that then allows us to spot through text mining and machine learning, the sort of second step. In the acknowledgement sections of publications, we can see sometimes a funder grant is actually referred to by its code. Sometimes the funder will be referred to by name, but where they're only referred to by a code. So it says, for example, we acknowledge with thanks U348-7. If we hadn't already done the work to know what those numbers and letters mean, what that code refers to, that it links to a grant that is associated with publications, it would be very, very hard to detect in the cases where the funder has been left out of the acknowledgements, where that funding came from. In some cases, we even know from the funder themselves that they know that this publication has actually been funded by them, even if the acknowledgement section says nothing at all. That is something that does happen, and we do capture that through the fact that we have worked with so many funders directly to sort of know all of their grant data sort of to begin with. So we can do those sorts of what looks like magic, those sorts of associations. So that's really how we do it. We have relied on a team in the background to already curate what is now $1.4 trillion worth of funding around the world, broken down by grant, broken down by resulting publications. It is pretty easy to do this sort of filtering in the Explorer, whether it's for institutions or publishers. You would simply go either to the quick search, as we're doing here. It'll expand. You can either search within your institution or the full database. And if you start just typing a name, you'll be used to what we call the awesome search, where it tries to do lots of different searches. There is now a funder name at the bottom that allows you to then filter whatever it is you're looking at, or to perform a general search for all the items that have actually been funded by that funder, where we've detected it in the names. And in the advanced search, there is also a funder name sitting there on the left as well. So just as you could filter before by identifier, like by grid, for example, to look for the University of Heidelberg, you can now also use either the grid search to search for this grid identifier up here, which I believe is the Wellcome Trust, or it could be Cancer Research UK I used, or you can search just the name over in the funder name. And you can actually try this. We're going to go and show you how it's done now. I'm going to drop into the full Altmetric database. I'm going to be searching everything. And I could, for example, down here, start to type in things like welcome, and it'll start to think to itself. It knows the various welcomes that are out there. You can see there are quite a lot that fit into this. The Wellcome Trust, of course, being the first one. We can select that. We can select several. We could say, for example, I also want Cancer Research UK to show up. I want to search both of these. I could add several more. Or we can use the grid database for that as well. If you're not familiar with grid, you can go and visit it at grid.ac, and you will find here in the Explore tab, you could, for example, search for, let's choose Bill and Melinda, Melinda Gates Foundation. There it is. There's their grid identifier. That'll be the one that corresponds to them. And I could, for example, just drop that in there, and it'll recognize that affiliation as well. And so we could search this way. We'd be searching for 3 of them, or I could just be searching for those. So then we're looking in the full Altmetric database for items affiliated with Bill and Melinda Gates. They are the ones who are funding it. And then I can run that search and get back the 1,100 items that have received attention, so that they have actually made their way around the Twitter sphere and the blogger sphere, and they've been referred to in the news, or they've been worked on in the Wikipedia. They've been cited, and then we could see their data right away. One example I actually did want to show you, just to sort of make it clear why it's useful that we are tracking more intelligently than just discovering the names of various institutions in the acknowledgement section, because that can actually sometimes cause some challenges. We could, for example, search for a phrase like CRISPR in the keywords, and I could then drop into the funder, welcome, again, why not? And we're now looking for everything that has CRISPR in it, that has a funder identification with welcome, and I can run that search, and it'll bring me back the fairly small amount of publications. There are only 70 tracked publications that have actually received attention, that have been funded by Wellcome, that are about CRISPR or have CRISPR in the keywords in the title. And so we can see here, for example, CRISPR babies, a view from the center of the storm. We can click on that. We can see Robin Lovell Badge is the publisher of this, the author rather, the researcher. We can go and visit the item itself, and it's worth doing that because there is in the acknowledgements section, there is the funding information. You can see Robin Lovell Badge, RLB, is funded by the Francis Crick Institute, which receives its core funding from Cancer Research UK, the UK Medical Research Council. You see these lovely numbers here that do identify these, and the Wellcome Trust. If you were to also search Cancer Research UK and CRISPR, you would find the same item. If you were to search the Francis Crick Institute, you would not find this item because they didn't fund it directly. What's happened here is that our service has picked up these identifiers here for the funders themselves, although of course Robin points out that his ultimate funder, the funder that was nearest his purse string, so to speak, was the institution that he is working for, or at least publishing under. So we do pick those up. If I were to redo this search with Cancer Research UK instead of Wellcome, we would find exactly the same article again. So I can try that right now. If I go back and edit my search, we're still looking the full Altmetric database. The word CRISPR is there. If I get rid of Wellcome Trust and type in Cancer Research UK, the system then thinks to itself again. And if I go and then do that search, now we see everything that Cancer Research UK is funded with CRISPR. And sure enough, they're right at the top. Their most impactful item, the item with the most attention, the most talk, is exactly that same one. Just for fun, let's try and search for Francis Crick. They do show up as a funder because they have funded some items, so they are indeed a funder of sorts. But you will notice that even though they do stuff on CRISPR, that item itself is not in there because they were not actually the funder of that particular item according to those acknowledgements. So fairly simple to do, I think. If I clear this again and then move out of here, in that quick search, you will find, again, if I type in Bill and Melinda, for example, we will find it is looking for keywords, title, funder name is right there. I could then hit that either in the full database or the institutional database. If I just want a very quick snap, there we go. There are the items from the full Altmetric database with Bill and Melinda Gates, clean of any keywords, sort of no searches, sort of filtering it down and looking at a small section. We can see right away what have they funded. How effective has the funding been when we're looking at the distribution of this information online. So that's the sort of the first section of this. Fairly simple, fairly easy to use, I think. Like I say, you can add several ones in. You could search for via sort of an OR function. You can look for several of these at once. And when it comes to exporting these data, so we can also pull out, sort of export these items. We have also added a new tab to, or rather, sorry, a new column to the export details. It's fairly simple. You would simply run your search, head to the research outputs tab, and then simply export the data. Once again, I can show you how this is done. It's fairly simple. We'll choose, let's limit actually these again, so it's not too long that we're spending on downloading this. But if I filter the data by just cancer and funded by Bill and Melinda Gates, and it has attention, once I've done that search, I could save it and get updates every day if I wanted to see where the attention to Bill and Melinda Gates funded research is going, what are the latest updates, or if I wanted to just help myself to these data via CSV export, I head over to that Research Outputs tab. I can then export it straight away as a CSV. It'll download itself now. It's fairly snappy when we're only dealing with 100 items. There is a limit to the number of items you can download from Altmetric, but you'll probably never run up against it because it's a million items. It's a million line items, if you like. So we can see here, there's the title, there's the score for it, the journal it came from, and over here, there is the funder. You'll notice it's not the only one. They obviously partner with Susan G. Komen. In other words, the publications have managed to secure funding from 2 or more of these items, these different funders. You can see down here this item actually from the PNAS USA. They actually have an enormous amount of funders that we've picked up there as well. So it's fairly easily exportable in the database. So very seamlessly integrated with these data so that you can create all sorts of new alerts, you can do some reporting, you can get a sense of how funding is spent and how the attention behaves for different funders out there. So fairly simple stuff, I think. Elegantly integrated. A lot of the hard work is done on the back end. We don't do it live. We don't try and find the funder as you do the search. We have indexed this from the many thousands of institutions that we have out there and the hundreds and hundreds of funders for whom we actually have either a simple acknowledgement, so all it would take, as we saw with the Francis Crick Institute Robin Lovell badge item on CRISPR babies. It could be the name, it could be a grant number that is associated with a funder. You'll be able to report on them and pull that data out. So onto the open access filter, we have now also integrated the ability to look at any data within the Altmetric Explorer and simply get back a true or false statement on whether something is open access or not. And to do that, we have employed the data from Unpaywall, Jason Preem and Heather Pivoir's project at Impact Story. We also, of course, have a list of known open access journals which belong and are curated by the DOAJ. And we actually also have a third source of these data, which come from Dimensions itself. Since Dimensions works quite a lot with publishers to index their data, to sometimes index their full text, so that people who are searching through the Dimensions database can do full text searching or can certainly rely upon good metadata as well. They will also provide us with the true or false statement as to whether something is open access. In Dimensions, it's actually a little bit more granular. We do things like gold, bronze, green, whether it's submitted, accepted, or published. In the Altmetric Explorer, we provide just simply the true or false statement. Is this open access or is it not? So those are the three sources that we've used in order to determine open access open access status out there. And again, fairly simple to do. Again, this is something that you would do in the advanced search where we just began our search. There is an open access outputs only filter. And again, it comes out via exactly the same export method, doing your search, filtering down to only open access items, and then popping over to the outputs or research outputs tab and simply exporting exactly the same way as I did before. So we can try that again. If I pop over to the Explorer, I could actually still use this from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, actually. Down here, it's got my settings from before, of course. I might choose something slightly broader just to, let's see what we get with this. 272, that's all right. So I've now got the keyword gene. We're still looking at Bill and Melinda Gates. My goodness, I've picked some tongue twisters today. And down here, we then on the right have the open access status. Please show me only the items that are indeed open access. And I can then simply click that. I then have my data. I'm in the research outputs tab, not the highlights or timeline. And then again, I can simply export that. Now, if you don't filter by open access status, you would still have the tab in the raw export that would simply say open access status, true, false, false, true, false. So it's delivered with any set that you're exporting. You will see there both true and false for various items. So this item is indeed open access, that one is not, but you can choose to only have the open access items. Here's how it looks if we just go and open the outputs themselves. There's the OA status item. There's funder, so we're still delivering funder as well. We're still looking at that, but here they are now all true, of course, because that's what we've filtered by. You couldn't filter by only closed access, but you can do that fairly simply by exporting everything from a data set that you're starting with, whether it's everything from a certain funder or whether it's everything from a certain author at your institutions or perhaps a certain department or whatever it is that you're looking at. And then, of course, you can drop away the items that are false. You could simply filter them away in the Excel export. So you can do that as well. It's much easier, however. Oh, it's going to be lost forever. I don't know what to do. So there you essentially have the two updates that we have made. So why did we bother doing this? So with funding data, increasingly funders are looking for justifications for the funding output. Was it worth investing in these projects? That is measured in a couple of different ways. It has traditionally been number of publications successfully submitted to a certain set of journals, whether those are top tier journals or whether they are journals that are very relevant to the certain field, or whether they are high impact journals that have a high impact factor, or whether it's the number of citations that the resulting publications have actually had. That has been one of the traditional ways in which one looks at the impact of a certain bit of funding. Of course, some funders go a bit further and will also look at things like resulting inventions. Have we patented something based on the publications that we funded? Have the patents themselves received this funding? And has that perhaps been commercialized or productized? Have there been certain discoveries? Has this influenced policy? And with the policy question, of course, Altmetric already does that job. at looking at whether a certain publication has shown up within policy before. But this also allows for a publisher or an institution or an author or the funder themselves to look at the data and say, well, here's everything that we funded. And it's either everything we funded, or it's filtered by a certain keyword, or it's a time period, everything that's been published in the last 6 months, for example, that we have also funded. You can filter that in the Explorer as well. You would then be able to see, well, this is the extra audience that we've received, the things that are not measured by just simply looking at citations, or in addition to things, the very valuable things like citations or number of publications, or perhaps things like patent and inventions and licenses and things like that. Here's our extra audience. Here's the Twitter audience. Here's the news stories that we have garnered through our publishing. And through our funding. So that is probably the strongest use case for this. It'll give you the extra audience, show you some extra impact, some engagement around the items which have actually been funded by a particular funder or set of funders. And when it comes to open access filtering, it is increasingly the case now, and this has been a very recent development, I think, that items that are open access are beginning to be seen as garnering more attention in Altmetric. We see more distribution. That makes some intuitive sense because, of course, that something is open, you would think would then engage audiences more. Up to very recently, it wasn't absolutely provable. It used to be the sort of gut feeling of the Altmetrics community that open access certainly helps this. But we've done a bit of a deep dive into this, and we're actually doing the webinar tomorrow for the German region. It'll be in English, but we are looking at all of the publications associated with Germany over 10 years, and we are looking at citation behavior, Altmetric behavior, relative citations, so relative to the field that a publication is in. How does the citation behavior behave with that? How does the Altmetric data behave when it's open access versus closed access? And spoiler alert, we are seeing some significant differences now between whether something was published closed access and the amount of attention it received online, the amount of attention it receives from the scholarly community. And so this filter feels like a natural step that we need to add to Altmetric now as well. And so you could begin to benchmark a full institution's open access publications versus closed. You could also just look at what the footprint is like for open versus closed for any institution. Because of course we have the ability for our users to be able, let's just go and clear this field again. Anybody could drop into the Altmetric database and simply say, well, I would like to have a look at, let's pick Heidelberg University because I know they publish rather a lot. So you can search, of course, the name itself, or drop in the grid identifier, because as you just saw, Heidelberg, there is more than one. And so we can, for example, search for Heidelberg University and find indeed it is this one that we are after. I could, if I wanted to, be very, very specific with that. It's not so much of a problem with things like University of Cambridge or perhaps Bristol, but this we know is indeed the Heidelberg University we are talking about. And I could simply say, well, let's have a look at everything that's been published open access by Heidelberg University that has then also received attention. So what we're about to see here is not going to be everything that Heidelberg has published, but it's the items that Heidelberg have published which have at least received one Facebook post or one tweet or a news story and so forth, which is why we're seeing 13,000 items that have actually been mentioned out of a possible 17,000, which have also things like Mendeley data or citation data. In reality, of course, they have published way more than that, but those items have yet to receive anything that would qualify it for a record in Altmetric, whether that is Mendeley data or whether it's things like a news story or some attention from faculty of 1,000 or a policy source. So you could look at that, and then you could go back and say, all right, we've got 13,000 items there. What about the items in total? So it's 22,000 items that have been mentioned. So without doing the proper due diligence that would allow me to say this, it seems like the dominant amount of items that are open access get some attention. There's only a little bit extra when we include items that are not open access. So it seems like out of all of the attention that Heidelberg has received, that pool of data is mostly open access. So it allows you to do that as well. And you could either use this as a way of reading up on any particular topic that is open access that Heidelberg has produced, or has been published in the last few months, or has been receiving attention recently. We can filter it that way as well, to get a sense of how an institution's open access mandates might be producing new audiences and things like that. So there's lots of flexibility there. You can combine both of these filters, whether it's funding or open access, with any other of the advanced searches out there, including looking at the time that something was published or at the time in which it received attention. And guess what? That is the end of my brief webinar. Like I said, it is, well, that was only 25 minutes of me chatting. So let me quickly have a look at some questions. Very good. There's people confirming that they can hear me, which is good. We have a question here. What is the difference between the funder name and the affiliation grid? Is it the same result to use the grid ID to search for a funder, even if you only use the affiliation field? That is a great question. And earlier on today, I actually tested this. So it is actually the same result. Because we have no publications technically belonging to a funder other than the fact that they funded something, if you were to search for just the Wellcome Trust, let's try this right now. So I've cleared everything. If I were to type in here, Wellcome Trust, I believe it was the Wellcome Trust I actually used when I was testing this myself. Let's have a look. Full Altmetric database, Wellcome Trust. We want to see them in terms of their filter. So we've got 380 items, 495 outputs. Let us just double check by using Wellcome Trust's own grid identifier, because that is actually ultimately the gold standard of this. That is sort of the machine readable way of doing this. If I drop that in there as well, it should be around the same. We will see. Oh, it's a lot more actually. Oh no, that's because I didn't hit enter. Sorry about that. There we go. One always has to select the name and not be so impatient like I was. It is the same number, so 495 outputs, 380 have been mentioned. Now, as a second step, let's pop over here and type Wellcome Trust into here, and let's see if it bears out what I was saying. We have a lot more actually. I'm going to have to come back to you about this one because the one that I tried, it was identical. It was cancer, I think it might have been Cancer Research UK. So there is some difference there. So I will make a note of that one and I will actually send around with our slides what the difference there is. I have a feeling that it could be that where particular grant numbers have been referenced, we have then worked out that that belongs to the Wellcome Trust, and that means that the amount where we're querying the funder specifically is the Wellcome Trust is larger. But I'll hesitate to be sure on that one. I will double check on that one. But yes, thank you for looking at that. I would suppose the immediate feedback, I suppose we could say, is that if you're really after the most precise way of looking at this, I would be using the funder name part of the advanced search to have a look at that. That is a great question. Thank you, Andrew, for that one. Does Altmetric only identify publications that receives attention? Yes, we are not a database in the sense that one might consider PubMed to be a database. We don't begin with every record in the world of every publication and then add attention to it. We actually create a record for an item once we have seen that it's received attention. And the reason that that works is the following. We begin by listening out for items, for links that look like they belong to research. So springer.com/something, or pubmed.com/something, or dx.doi.org/ a bunch of numbers. We know that those resolve to portals of publications. And then once we have found the news story that links to one of those recognizable sources, we then follow that link automatically, of course, there are no people doing this. And then try and identify based on that page, based on the metadata, we're looking for a title, we're looking for an identifier, we're looking for some metadata that would allow us to then work out which article this actually was, and we then create an item based on that. So you will not see the world's publications in our database, you will see the world's attention to publications. The metric there is publications. If you're doing a comprehensive literature search, you would not be doing that in Altmetric. In Altmetric, you begin with, I want to know what attention there is for research about the following keyword or from the following institution or the following time period. It is not all research, it is only the research that has had attention from the 20,000 blogs that we look at, or the news sources, or Wikipedia, or whatever it is. Yeah, thank you for that question, actually, because today's update webinar, I didn't go and step back and go through or cover what is actually the sort of core functioning of Altmetric. Is it possible for authors at specific institutions, for example, Texas A&M, to link to their articles to a research grant so we could search for Altmetrics by funder at the institutional level? You can do that anyway. You can't do it manually. At the moment, we are pulling this data from Dimensions, and Dimensions is automating that as much as possible. To give you a reason why we do that, we have decided to invest in the artificial intelligence and machine learning approach to finding and tracking and interrelating research. So we track now 101 million publications, 3.5 million grants, and various other things like patents and clinical trials. That's 4.5 billion links between research data. And you can't do that manually, and it's hard enough to just do the publications. Web of Science, for example, employs 1,500 people to just do the indexing. We have 370 people in all of digital science. That is all 13 companies put together, of which the Dimensions and Altmetric team is just one or two examples. So what you could do if you wanted to have a look at an institutional level, we can actually try this right now. Let's have a look at, for the affiliation, Texas A&M. It'll have a bit of a think. There are various others in there as well. You could, of course, use the grid. You could add several institutions. In fact, that might be, it'll be perhaps one of the reasons why the Wellcome numbers were different. Perhaps there are more than, there are several Wellcome funding centers, perhaps. Again, I'm going to come back to that one, I think, offline. So I could look at Texas A&M as an actual affiliation of the publication, and I could then have a look at, let's choose Susan G. Komen, actually. So there are a couple, as we can see. Susan G. Komen, let's round it down a little bit. Susan G. Whoops, I actually saw it just there. It is a little bit laggy on my connection when I do this on the road. Let's have a look. I'll make my life a little bit easier, actually, by putting their full name in. There, let's choose that one, and then we could simply run a search. So we're looking in the full database. We're not looking in a particular institution. This would be what you see if you are an implemented customer of ours. You would see your data first, and you can look within that data, but you can also scope out everything that we have ever seen mentioned online. And then we want to see only the items that have Texas A&M in their affiliation and Susan G. Komen, and run it that way. So you can then see there are actually only 5 items that actually have had some traction. Here you can see sort of what I was talking about. There are 3 additional items which have perhaps only received attention that we can spot from, for example, Mendeley data. So because there are Mendeley data there, and because we track Mendeley as a source, we do pick that up and we create a record for it, even though it has actually not been referred to anywhere else. But there will be, no doubt, many other items as well that have funding from Komen. They just have not been mentioned on the social web. If you wanted to get a full sense of all of the publications that have resulted from grants at a particular institution, or all of the grants for a particular institution, you would actually do that in the Dimensions service. If you want to check that out, there is a free web app for Dimensions, app.dimensions.ai. It's also where you will find information about our webinar that we're doing tomorrow based on really looking at open access data. So dimensions.ai, there is a free app there as well. The licensable version of Dimensions will actually also allow you to filter by funder and by institution. So you could say, for example, University of Utah, and give me Susan G. Komen, give me Wellcome, give me Breast Cancer Research UK, give me Macmillan, or whatever it is, or larger ones like, for example, NSF, for example. That would be probably the best place to do it. But if you want to just see the items that have also received attention, that have been funded by one or more funders and belong to a certain institution like, let's say, Texas A&M, you can do that in Altmetric. That's sort of what it was built for. Wow, there are a lot of questions here. You've done as I thought. There are many questions. Is there a list of funders that are covered? Yes, this list I can actually. It's not listed in Dimensions, but it's about 350 funders that Dimensions works with. Those do so one of those, for example, is NIH, which of course is many funders as a group. So that number is a little bit misleading, but those are broken down by year. They are constantly, that they have tens of thousands of publications associated with them. So it's, and like I say, millions of grants. So it is not by any means all of the funders in the world, but it is easily the largest funding database that we use. I will see if I can get a list offline for that. I will make sure that we distribute that if I'm able to get my hands on it. Does open access include only gold OA or all OA? Good question, thank you. It is all open access. So whether it is bronze, gold, green, or whether it's, yeah, those are the ones, right? Submitted or accepted or published, whether it's something that the publisher, whether it's just from DOAJ, and so you perhaps don't even know what type of OA it is a simple yes or no thing. It is all open access added together that we know of. If it's in unpaywall as open access, or if it's in the Dimensions service listed as open access, thanks to our work with the publishers, or if it's in DOAJ, we will provide that yes or no, whether it's gold or green or hybrid or bronze, it'll be in there, yes. Would a funder search on Wellcome Trust include all the Wellcome groups? Yes, here we go. Somebody has actually already asked the question, which I was ruminating loudly, might be the reason why I saw a difference in the affiliation versus funder. Does it include all of them? We have made this fairly granular. So by default, if it has a different record in grid, as you can see here, we have Wellcome Trust, Wellcome Sanger, Wellcome Center for Human Genome Imaging, welcome. We will provide records for all of these. So if you go into the Altmetric Explorer and actually have a look at the full database, again, I will reset this and then put it back to the full database. If I just type in funder name, Wellcome, you will see that it is starting to ask itself, well, which one do you mean? There are quite a lot of funders that we know of. There are some even that are being connected, they're being recognized by a portion of their name. You could add one after the other if you really wanted to. So Wellcome Trust, I could type another one, for example. I could search Wellcome Sanger Institute, and now I'm searching both of those. So it is, if there are multiple records, in other words, if there are multiple entities which actually do have different addresses, they have appeared in a different manner. It's not just the word welcome and we just assume it's the same one. We had a team build the grid database. There are now almost 100,000 institutions out there. It does go as granularly as looking at the universities, and university hospitals will have a different entity because they are distinct in the metadata. Or they will, if there is more than one welcome that is distinct, and our engineers have built separate pages for these so we can reconcile them more accurately than just using the word welcome, then you will also be able to see them in the Altmetric Explorer like you can here. Yeah, should be interesting for you to play with actually to see what you find there. But yeah, thank you for that. I actually think that that is something to do with how I've seen the different numbers there as well. Would an article that is OA after 6 months automatically switch from false to true for the OA filter? That's a good question. It's one also that I will double check, but we are getting updates from Dimensions all the time. And so you will actually see, I don't usually like to do this because I'm jumping into a different system and it might disorientate people, but you will see a drop off in citations. So we're looking at publications at the moment, the world's publications. You will see in the overview for citations, if you were to look at open access, for example, and look at the timeline for it, this is the world's open access data, so the publications for it, you see these drop-offs, right? So as things go from 2010 all the way up to 2019, this drop-off here is precisely because open access embargoes are kicking in. And so we at periodical levels get refresh data from Dimensions, which then corrects the Altmetric data from was closed access is now open access. Doesn't happen absolutely automatically. There are teams working in the background to make sure we're refreshing the database, so it's not scraping the website and watching for it, or attempting to access it, and then if it can, it's somehow open access. We are refreshing those data, however. But you do see, yes, these data are affected by embargoes quite significantly, because the number of publications shoot up for closed precisely for that reason, 2.7 to 3.5. You see a concomitant dropping in this case, bronze open access, which of course is that sort of publisher version of open access where they make things free to read after it being closed and traditionally published, but you see that elsewhere too. Apologies for jumping into a different service to make my point. But yeah, so it's not automatic, but it does happen as we refresh the data. Let's see, how can a funder determine what proportion of their output is closed access and list those for compliance purposes? It's not easy if you only allow filtering on open. Yes, I would actually recommend, again, the Dimensions service for getting a full list of your publications and how they've behaved. That is actually what the Dimensions service was originally for, amongst many other things, was a tool for funders to be able to say, show me all the resulting publications for these grants, or for grants from 2018, or for just everything that we have in our affiliations. There, it doesn't matter whether it's received citations, it may have received none, it may have received 0 Altmetric attention. That's okay, because maybe it's been in 1,000 patents and it's been an extremely impactful piece of work. That is where you would do real benchmarking on a funder level. For the Altmetric service, we're looking really at what kind of audiences and attention have my funded pieces of research received when we look at a particular funder, or whether it's open access, for example. So that is one of the most important ones. I see that there is a follow-up to that question. You said you only include articles that get attention, so maybe this would not be a use case for this function. Yes, I do agree with you. So the best place for a funder to get a full understanding of their grants would be the Dimensions service. Once again, I find myself apologizing for jumping in here. This would be, for example, a way, we're looking at the almost 102 million publications that we have aggregated over the time. If I were, for example, Susan G. Komen, I could limit it to that, and I'm now looking at the 5,000 publications belonging where we know that Komen was a funder, and down here then is the open access versus closed access. And as you can see, we choose all OA, that is the filter that's going through to Altmetric, and then you could actually go even further and say, well, I actually only want closed, I want bronze, and you can see already that we have open and closed. We can see that 3/4, slightly less than 3/4, maybe 1/5 of items there are closed versus open. So actually, Susan G. Komen, just from these very rough numbers, we can say they are mostly publishing open access. We could even go and see those items. We could even see the grants and the resulting publications as well. Slightly off topic, but that is sort of where you would do it. You would go to the source in Dimensions for that. Are the non-mentioned outputs not included at all? Yes. Anything that has not received any attention, not even Mendeley data, is not known to Altmetric. We are only tracking interactions with publications. Yeah, absolutely. I think probably I had answered it by the time you'd asked that question. Wow, I think we are through our questions. Feel free to ask any more in the remaining time. If not, I'll bring up this slide here. You are very welcome in case you find yourself not quite able to formulate your question for a sort of a typing it an out situation, or perhaps it strikes you later on that you had a question about something. You're very welcome to email me. You can even @ me on Twitter, as the kids say, or I have my phone number there as well. There is one more question. Does Dimensions include publications that do not have any attention? Yes, absolutely. So this, the metric for adding publications into Dimensions is that they have been detected, that they are in Crossref, that they are in DOAJ, that they are in ReadCube's system, and they are of course working with publishers. There could be items here that have received no attention at all. In fact, you will see them. There is Altmetric attention here, but if I were to let's get something very, very specific. Let's try machine learning just to find something that doesn't have Altmetric attention. Let's see. Yep, those first two items. These are chapters of books. That's an article there. They have received no citations or altmetric attention. So they do exist in dimensions there, which means that you are looking at, as best as possible, the most complete landscape of publications. These items here will have altmetric records because they have also been referenced online. Once they're referenced, we then build that reference. We're then cross-checking it with things like Crossref. We are building modules that can read the nature.com page correctly and so forth, so that you would then find them over in the Altmetric Explorer. To test this, you could, for example, search for exactly what I just searched for, machine learning, and you will see that we are only going to be displaying the items about machine learning that have actually received attention. So the number will be much smaller. So here are everything that we have about machine learning, whereas if you were to look in dimensions, sort of the publication and citation database that we have with all the grants, it's 2 million publications, which tells you that most of them don't receive social attention. That's probably very expected. It is an extremely complex, perhaps not something that writes the headlines so much. It could just be that they are not published in sources that lend themselves to social sharing. So it's a lot more complete, whereas we're showing you here is the world's attention to the phrase machine learning as it appears in the records of publications. And we'll go as far as showing you things like the demographics of that audience. This is almost the sub-audience, the smaller audience to publications about machine learning, heavily from the US, heavily from the EU, and we could even drill that down even further. We're now looking at all tweets about publications that have the words machine learning in them. So these are items that have had attention, and we can drill down further. We could export these data as well. And if we did export those data, it's rather a large set, it's probably not going to download snappily. We would then also still have the open access status. We would have the funder information in there as well, because those are delivered in the research outputs tab as well. Just download it there, and you'd be able to have a look at that. There is another question while we wait for that download. Wonderful. It looks like we've received our last question. Thank you very much for your attention. We will be sending around the recording. I'm going to sit down and do my due diligence on some of the questions I couldn't answer. I'll be checking in with our team. Thank you very much for your time today. It was a wonderfully attended webinar. Very good questions. Thank you for putting me through my paces. And have a very good rest of the week. And we look forward to speaking again with you in the future. Thank you, and bye for now.